Whether thou art a ghost that hath come from the earth, or a phantom of night that hath no home, or one that lieth dead in the desert, or a ghost unburied, or a demon, or a ghoul, whatever thou be until thou art removed, thou shalt find here no water to drink. Thou shalt not stretch forth thy hand to our own. Into our house enter thou not. Through our fence break through thou not. We are protected, though we may be frightened. Our life you may not steal, though we may be scared to death.
Welcome to Scared to Death, Creeps, Peepers, Roberts, and Annabelles. I'm Dan.
Hello, Dan. I'm Lynze. I was just checking. I was just thinking, making sure.
Crazy that this is already the December 3rd episode.
I know. I was working on something like with our custody.
Yeah.
And then it's like the way the new iCal update is like from
with
the
our custody?
with Monroe, our custody.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I was working on something with our custody for Monroe, like our back and forth schedule with her.
Oh, gotcha. So you schedule. It's like all of a sudden we're in a custody battle. I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, you just never said that word that way. Okay, gotcha.
I have, but okay.
Okay.
But anyways, it said week 50. And I was like, holy shit. Like from like that point on, it was just 2 more weeks of the year. That's insane.
Yeah, 2025, almost here. Full quarter through the 21st century.
Weird.
Okay, so no announcements today.
We're just going to get right into it, right, Dan?
Yeah. How many stories do you have?
Well, Dan, believe it or not, I have just 2 stories.
Okay.
And my first story involves 2 family members seeing a strange someone in their house.
Okay.
Just going to leave it at that.
All right.
It just has this moment of like, oh, what just happened there? And then my second tale, I haven't done this in a long time, and I'm actually really excited for this one. It's like a very hard but beautiful story to listen to, and I just feel really inclined to share this kind of tale at this time of year.
Yeah.
As we're rolling into the holidays and we're rushing about, and I think at this time of year we're often thinking about those that are no longer with us, our most loved people, and I think that this is such a beautiful tale about that.
Awesome. I look forward to hearing it.
I hope you do.
I have my standard too, but the first, not so standard, a paranormal tale based in true crime. And honestly, I think the true crime portion is the most interesting part of the story. I'll be talking about Mary Ann Cotton, an English woman convicted of the murder of her stepson in 1872, who almost certainly killed another 20 people, most of them her children.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah, it's a wild story. And ever since her execution, her spirit has allegedly not been resting. And then we will head to Mexico for a very weird tale about the host of a paranormal call-in show, La Mano Peluda, getting wrapped up in a caller's case of demonic torment.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. I was fascinated by it. Once you are socked up, I will begin.
Well, excuse me.
Yeah.
Of course, I went to talk and I joked. This month, trying to honor as many of the holidays as I possibly can that occur this month, I have Hanukkah socks.
Oh, nice. They're very fluffy.
They're very fluffy and very cozy.
Okay, here we go. Mary Ann Cotton. She's dead and she's rotten, lying in bed with her eyes wide open. Sing, sing, what shall we sing? Mary Ann Cotton tied up with string. Where, up in the air, selling black puddings, a penny a pair. This is a once popular dark nursery rhyme. You might even still hear it today walking around or past a playground in England, especially in County Durham. Mary Ann Cotton is thought to be one of the most prolific Black Widow serial killers in English history. While only ever convicted of 1 murder, she is strongly assumed to have killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 21 victims.
Dang.
Yeah, including 3 of her husbands and nearly a dozen of her own children.
What?
Her primary motive seems to have been financial, to either collect insurance money, rid herself of mouths to feed that would have required spending some of that precious insurance money, or ridding herself of someone who might take some kind of legal action against her or otherwise, stand in the way of her getting some money. Born into a poor mining family in the village of Low Morsley in County Durham on Halloween, October 31st, 1832, Mary Ann's early life was not an easy one, and probably is what helped motivate her to do what she did, to try and put her early life of poverty far behind her. Like many girls from mining towns in the 19th century, she was quickly taught how to take care of a house and children on next to nothing, and taught very little else. Coal mining has long been a particularly dangerous profession, and Mary Ann's father died after falling roughly 150 feet down into a mine shaft February of 1842, when young Mary Ann was only 9 years old. Her mother then remarried the next year in 1843. At the age of 16, Mary Ann left home, escaping from one thankless, bleak life, barely grinding out a living, and into another. She took a job in a middle-class home in the nearby village of South Hetton, just a few miles down the road, as a domestic servant. Mary Ann now worked long days nearly every day as a maid, cook, and nanny to the couple's dozen children. 4 years later, at the age of 20 in 1852, she made her escape out of a life of labor. Or so she thought. She met and married William Mowbray, a man who had just been offered what sounded like a promising job on the railway lines of Cornwall, and the young couple moved to a rural area of southwest England. As it turned out, life in an unincorporated railway shanty town was no better than life in a coal mining town, and Mary Ann would quickly give birth to either 4 or 5 children, one right after another, the exact number not known due to notoriously inadequate record keeping of the time. So let's just pick the number 5, so I don't have to refer to her subsequent children as her 5th or 6th child, and her 6th or 7th child, etc. All but one of these children would die early in their childhood, all before the age of 4. And in 1857, just 5 years after getting married and moving, the young couple decided to take their last remaining child, Margaret Jane, and move back to County Durham, near where Mary Ann grew up and where she will spend the rest of her wicked life. While we don't know for sure if Mary Ann killed her first 4 children, it seems extremely likely she did, judging by the amount of death that would follow her throughout her life, especially when it came to her children. Almost no one close to Mary Ann seemed to survive for very long. William got a new job working on a steam vessel that sailed out of Sunderland, just a dozen miles from South Hetton, where she'd lived when the two had met. In 1858, she gave birth to another baby girl, Isabella Jane, her 6th child. And then 2 years later, on June 22nd, 1860, Mary Ann's eldest living daughter, Margaret Jane, passed away unexpectedly after a sudden bout of some illness that affected her stomach at the age of either 3 or 4. Again, very likely murdered by her mother. Mary Ann gave birth to another girl in 1861, her 7th child, who she now also named Margaret Jane. 2 years after her birth, a son named John Robert William was born, her 8th baby. Mary Ann was now raising her 3 living children while married to a man making no more money than a coal miner. Life on a ship was almost as dangerous as life in the mines, and Mary strongly encouraged her husband to take out a life insurance policy, with obviously her as the beneficiary. And shortly after she did, their baby John Robert died at just the age of 1, followed by his father William dying in early 1865. Both thought to have likely died of some unknown, quote, intestinal disorder. Most sources say they died of a gastric fever. And many who have studied Mary in recent years think their symptoms were brought on by arsenic poisoning. Mary Ann collected a 35-pound life insurance policy, which was equal to about a half year's pay for William at the time, and now she moved again with her 2 remaining daughters. And within just a few weeks, in March of 1865, her 4-year-old Margaret Jane now also died, following intestinal pain, almost certainly brought about by arsenic poisoning. And then her remaining daughter, Isabella, now her only living child, was sent away to live with Mary Ann's mother. Mary Ann, currently 32 years old now, is free of her husband, free of her children, and she has a decent amount of money in her pocket. She soon gets a job as a fever nurse in a hospital in Sunderland, where she quickly meets a patient named George Ward, who lived in nearby Seaham Harbor, about 5 miles away. The two were married a few months later, in August of 1865. Doesn't seem like it was a union of love, at least not on Mary Ann's part. By the time the two had married, she had already set her eye on somebody else and started having an affair with a neighbor named Joseph Natras. Then the following year, Mary's new husband, George, wouldn't you know it, he'll die. Just 14 months after marrying Mary, on October 20th, 1866. George had been in poor health since before he had met Mary. His death certificate would state that he died from cholera and typhoid fever. But his attending doctor later reported that while Ward had been very ill, he had been greatly surprised that his death came on so suddenly. Yet again, now thought that he was poisoned, and once again Mary collects a hefty life insurance payout. The second husband she almost certainly killed. Not long after George's death, Mary Ann then came across an ad for domestic help from a recently widowed, fairly wealthy man, James Robinson, her next husband and the next target for her money for murder scheme. James lived back in Sunderland and had been left with 5 children, the youngest of whom was quite ill. Mary Ann was hired to take care of James's family in November of 1866, and within a month of taking the job, James' youngest child is dead. She had suffered from terrible stomach distress in her final days. Mary Ann had now very likely killed 7 of her own children, 2 husbands, and 1 of James Robinson's children. And now James, overcome with grief over the death of his baby girl, turns to his new housekeeper and her likely murderer for comfort. And soon, Mary will become pregnant with his child, her 9th. And she's put her affair with Joseph Nattrass on hold. She also has to leave her new man to return home and deal with her mother for a moment. In April of 1867, Mary is summoned to her mother's bedside about 6 miles away in Seam Harbor because her mom is sick with hepatitis. By the time Mary arrives, her mother is beginning to recover from her illness. But then shortly after Mary arrives, what do you know it, she begins to suffer from terrible stomach pains. She's also confronts her daughter about Mary Ann allegedly stealing and selling some of her possessions, and it seems her mother may have wanted to have her daughter charged with theft, but nothing would come of this because 9 days after Mary shows up, her mom is dead. 7 of her own children, 2 husbands, another child in her care, and now her mother. Mary Ann returned to the Robinson household in Sunderland following her mother's death, with her daughter Isabella Jane, whom her mother had been watching after. Within just a few weeks, 2 of James's surviving children will now also die, closely followed by poor Isabella, who was now either 8 or 9 years old. 3 children in Mary's care die in a single month's time, and all of them died from, quote, abdominal discomfort. 8 of her own children are dead now, 2 husbands, her mother, and 3 other kids who died in her care. Despite these deaths, 4 months later, after Mary Ann revealed to James that she was pregnant with his child, James does the honorable thing and the two are wed in August of 1867. Their child, Margaret Isabella, her 3rd daughter, she named Margaret in case you were keeping track, born in November, and wouldn't you know it, up and dies 3 months later in February of 1868 after suffering from some mysterious stomach ailment. Still, if James was at this point suspicious of Mary, he doesn't confront her. All this death doesn't put an end to the sexual side of their marriage because a year later, in June of 1869, Mary will give birth to a son named George, her 10th child. Finally, within 7 or so months of George's birth, James seems to get an inkling of who his wife really is. At the beginning of 1870, James Robinson finds out that Mary Ann had been stealing from him, and that she had stolen a lot. She had been doctoring his checkbook, and he had gone from being relatively wealthy when he met her into falling into debt. She had also been pressuring him for months to take out a life insurance policy. Enraged, and rightfully so, after putting her theft together with all the recent deaths and her insistence on him taking out a life insurance policy and making her the beneficiary, James ends their marriage and has Mary Ann thrown out of his house. Knowing he could have her arrested, she doesn't fight to stay. And Mary Ann, despite having birthed 10 children, is now child-free once again because James has kept young George with him, and that'll be the only reason young George will outlive his mother. Mary is also broke again, and that same year in early 1870, a friend named Margaret Cotton, so many Margarets in this tale, now gives Mary Ann a place to stay in nearby Walbottle, just under 20 miles away from where she was living. At the time, Margaret's recently widowed brother, Fred Cotton, was living with her, along with his 2 boys, Fred Jr. and Charles. And Margaret had let it slip to Mary Ann that she had a savings of approximately £60. Mary Ann knew that if Margaret died, that money would go straight to her brother Fred, who Mary had quickly started a romantic relationship with. Poor Margaret does die, 3 weeks after meeting Mary, in March of 1870 from, I bet you can guess, a stomach ailment. If your name was Margaret and you had a close relationship with Mary Ann, you were as good as dead. 9 of her own children, 2 husbands, her mother, 3 children in her care, and now a friend who made the terrible decision to take pity on her and help her, all got sick and died from a nasty stomach ailment while Mary was either raising them, had married them, or had just met them. 15 people in total now. Around this time, Mary Ann's former neighbor and lover, Joseph Nattrass, one of the few men to become close to Mary and live for any real length of time, moved into a home near Mary in West Auckland, and Mary resumed her affair with him. Then about 3 weeks after the death of his sister, Mary Ann told Fred she is pregnant with her 11th child now. And in September of 1870, Mary Ann and Frederick Cotton, husband number 4, get married, despite the fact that she was still legally married to James Robinson, as official divorce proceedings had not been carried out. And despite the fact that Joseph Nattrass, not Frederick, could quite possibly be the father of Mary Ann's latest baby. So Mary now became Mary Ann Cotton, the name we know her by today. And she convinces Fred to move to West Auckland. Not sure what reason she sold him on to do this, but the real reason was to live closer to her lover, Joseph. Her next child, Robert Robson, her 11th, born at the start of 1871, and within the year in December, 1 year and 2 days after getting married, Frederick Cotton, Again, husband number 4 dies of some sort of gastric fever. More stomach problems. Mary is the beneficiary of a recent insurance policy she had taken out on Fred. The third husband she has very likely murdered, possibly the 16th person she's killed. Then just 3 months later, Mary moves in with her lover, moves her lover, Joseph, into Frederick's former house in West Auckland, her lover who might actually be Robert's father. By the time she moves in with Joseph, she is already pregnant again with her lover's child or her recently murdered husband's, a boy she will name Frederick, her 12th. But soon, Mary will have spent all of the insurance money and she'll have to return to her cold-blooded cutting cost measures. On March 10th, 1872, young Fred Cotton Jr., still an infant, dies of gastric fever. The 10th child of hers she has likely killed. Just 18 days later, on March 28th, her other son, Robert Robson, dies of convulsions. Then just 3 days after Robert dies, on April 1st, her lover, Joseph Nattrass, dies of gastric fever. Joseph had just made Mary the beneficiary of his will and a recipient of the new, life insurance policy, a move that surely cost him his life. Mary had also collected life insurance payouts following the deaths of her recent children. She's now very likely killed 11 of her kids, 3 of her husbands, her mother, 3 other kids, a friend, and a lover, 20 people. And she may have killed Joseph to pursue a new lover some sources say she had just met, Richard Quick Mann, a custom and excise agent specialized in breweries, who she may have begun to have an affair with while she was still with Joseph. Regardless, following Joseph's death, Mary Ann, now 39 years old, back down to just one child in her care, her young stepson, Charles Cotton, and she has just taken out a life insurance policy on poor Charles. She soon meets Thomas Riley, a parish official, who asks Mary Ann to help him nurse a woman sick with smallpox. She agrees. She also complains that her stepson Charles, who is not quite 7, is making it hard for her to work. And she asks Thomas if her stepson can be committed to a workhouse, basically an orphanage. When the official doesn't agree to place Charles in this workhouse, Mary Ann claims he has become weak and sickly and makes the following remark to Riley: "I won't be troubled long. He'll go like all the rest of the Cottons." 5 days later, July 12th, 1872, young Charles dies. And Mary Ann Cotton is no longer troubled by him. She has now very likely killed 21 people. 11 of her own children, 3 of her husbands, her mother, 4 other children in her care, a friend, and a lover. Hearing this, Mr. Riley becomes rightfully very alarmed about the troubled comment and then Charles dying. He goes to the village police, persuades a doctor to delay writing a death certificate until the circumstances can be investigated. An inquest is held and a jury will return a verdict of natural causes. Mary Ann claimed to have used arrowroot to relieve the boy's illness and said Riley had only made accusations against her because she had rejected his romantic advances. She seemingly had gotten away with murder yet again. During the 19th century, arsenic was a popular choice for murderers. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless, difficult to detect in an autopsy. It's quickly absorbed into the body's tissues, making it a historically challenging poison to detect in a deceased individual until some time after their death. It was also readily available in 19th century England, as it was used for a variety of everyday household tasks. The symptoms of arsenic poisoning include extreme cramping, shortness of breath, and diarrhea, which made it very easy to mistake arsenic poisoning for many common natural illnesses of the time. However, after the verdict of natural causes, some suspicious local reporters looked into Mary further, and papers in the area began to report that she had moved often and death followed her wherever she went. 3 husbands, a lover, a friend, her mother, 12 or 13 children, going back to not knowing for certain if she killed 3 or 4 kids when she lived in southwest England, had all died of so-called stomach fevers. And now Dr. William Byers Kilburn, who had performed the autopsy on Charles, got a gut feeling that he had missed something. So he takes some tissue samples, passes them along to a forensic lab in Leeds to have them checked for arsenic. And sure enough, the results come back, the presence of arsenic is confirmed. Mary Ann is subsequently arrested for the murder of Charles Cotton, and 3 bodies of others she was suspected of killing are exhumed from the West Auckland Church Cemetery, located in the village of West Auckland. Fred Jr., Robert Robson, and Joseph Nattrass. And all bodies are confirmed to have arsenic inside of them. So all died from arsenic poisoning. Now it seems as if Mary Ann was about to die, but her story's still not quite finished. While waiting trial, she reveals that she has gotten pregnant again. She was a regular fertile myrtle. Her trial is postponed until the baby, Margaret Edith Cotton, another Margaret, and her 13th child, is born on January 10th, 1873. only the second of her children who will outlive her. 2 months later, on March 7th, 1873, her trial begins for the murder of Charles alone. Public outrage is strong. Just 2 weeks later, her trial is concluded, and it takes the jury less than 2 hours to deliver a verdict of guilty. And her sentence? Death by hanging. Her baby is taken from her. Her sentence of death by hanging swiftly carried out just over 2 weeks later, March 24th, 1873. London's The Daily News will report, after a few convulsive struggles, she ceased to exist. Mary Ann's execution was reportedly intentionally botched in order to make sure she suffered. The executioner used a much shorter rope than normal and only allowed her to have a 2-foot drop. So instead of having her neck broken and dying nearly instantaneously, she died slowly of strangulation. By the time she finally stopped kicking, the hood over her face was reportedly stained with blood. Witnesses were, quote, visibly disturbed as they watched her botched execution. Mary Ann was then buried on the grounds of the Durham jail. Her body was later exhumed and cremated. While she was only convicted for the murder of Charles Cotton, clearly, it's believed her victim count is much higher, likely 21. Ever since her death, Mary Ann's name has been used as a deterrent to prevent children from misbehaving in England. Some version of telling them, be a good boy or girl, or Mary Ann Cotton will come for you. And perhaps, according to the paranormal claims of some, this might be more than a hollow threat. Mary Ann's ghost might actually come for you, or at least reveal itself to you. Time now for the tale of the ghosts of Mary Ann Cotton and her victims. There are many areas around West Auckland where Mary Ann's ghost is said to still visit, including the West Auckland Town Hall, where a portrait of her hangs to this day, the West Auckland Cemetery, where some of her victims are still buried, a bench that now sits in place of one of her former residences, 20 Johnson Terrace in West Auckland, and the last house she lived in, where she murdered multiple victims and where Dr. Kilburn performed the autopsy on poor Charles Cotton. This house is located on Front Street, West Auckland, and overlooks the village green. The table where Dr. Kilburn conducted his post-mortem exam remains in the house, and according to the BBC, a teapot that Mary Ann reportedly used to brew her poisoned arsenic-laced tea was donated to the Beamish Museum in 1972. The bench is now known to many locals as a place to avoid. It is said a dark, foreboding presence surrounds the bench, and anyone who sits there will be overcome with a sudden and unnatural chill. Locals have also reported seeing the apparitions of children, thought by some to be Mary Ann's child victims, playing on the surrounding grass. The last residence of Mary Ann and her ever-changing family is currently being rented out by the owner, and some tenants who lived there in 2017 reported numerous incidents of paranormal activity. Sick of the torment, they allowed author and paranormal investigator Elaine Kelly to conduct an investigation. The tenants wished to remain anonymous, but Elaine described them as a middle-aged couple whose daughter had already left the family home. By the time Elaine began her investigation, she said that the tenants refused to even enter a room on the top floor anymore unless absolutely necessary because of what they described as the presence of a very angry and evil spirit. The entity's heavy, pacing footsteps could be heard all night long. And the spirit either was sometimes visiting the rest of the home, or other entities were also giving the couple problems. Objects were said to have been witnessed moving around the house on their own. The man of the house claimed he had been scratched by an unseen entity on numerous occasions, and that others in his home had been pushed while walking down the stairs by invisible hands. The couple said that their dog began to refuse to go up the stairs. He would only stand at the bottom, hair raised, looking up the staircase. The couple also claimed that they often felt like something at the top of the stairs was watching them. The man claimed that when he first moved in, he would often fall asleep next to the fireplace. He said he typically covered himself up with the blanket, but then he began to notice that when he woke up, the blanket was no longer covering him. Instead, it had been removed and was found neatly folded on the floor next to him. Both the man and his wife supposedly said that coins would often go missing, but then be found later, stacked in neat piles around the house. On the first floor in the main bedroom, there's a cupboard shut firmly with a large draught excluder on the floor in front of it, yet it still allegedly slams open and shut of its own accord. And that particular cupboard is a doorway to a tunnel that runs alongside the house. Originally, it led to the pub next door. It's believed that Mary Ann would lock her children in this tunnel to punish them. The man of the house has also claimed that he would often wake up in his bed in a state of paralysis, feeling as if someone was pushing him down into the mattress, hard enough to make it difficult for him to breathe. Was he being attacked by the ghost of Mary Ann? Did she wish to eliminate this family from her home? On the top floor, there was another smaller cupboard that Elaine said she found locked with crystals hanging on the door. The tenants explained that the crystals were there when they moved in. They said they had previously removed them, but then the paranormal activity in the room greatly increased. So they put them back and the activity lessened. Elaine asked the couple about some small wooden crosses hanging above the large fireplace downstairs. Apparently, when the activity became violent, the tenants would make one of these small crosses and pray with it, and afterwards they would hang it above the fireplace, and it would seem to calm the activity down for a while. During the investigation, Elaine and her team claimed to hear their fair share of knocks and bangs. They also claimed to record EVPs, many of which were the sounds of children crying out for help, particularly in and around the cupboard on the second floor. On the top floor, where the tenants refused to go, the investigation took a sinister turn when team members, one by one, claimed to feel the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Their stomachs convulsed, their fingers and toes tingled, their muscles cramped, their chests tightened, and they began to fear for their safety. They ended up leaving the house and calling an end to their paranormal investigation. So do the ghosts of Mary Ann Cotton and her many victims, most of whom were her own children, still linger in West Auckland? And does the ghost of Mary, specifically, want to take still more lives?
Mary Ann was a psychopath.
Right? I had to go over this story. So I had to create a second document that was just a body tracker to keep track of like how many kids she had versus how many kids died versus how many other people died around her. And they had so many of them had the same names.
That was killing me.
I was like, wait, is it the third or the fourth Margaret?
Poor Margaret, Marjorie's,
My God.
Maggie's, whatever nicknames.
It is crazy that every single child of hers
That's so sad.
that she actually spent any time raising, without exception, died. The only two kids of her like 13 kids she had that didn't die were the one that her third husband, I believe, I think it was her second or third.
I hope you kept track.
I know. Second, George took to raise, like he raised the little boy George on his own.
Mm-hmm.
So that prevented her from killing him. And then the only other kid that survived was the kid she had right before she was executed.
Unbelievable.
So given a chance, she would have undoubtedly killed them all.
Yeah, she loves to murder. She's
Crazy.
like, what
Murder
is it,
her
Belle
own
Gunnis?
kids. Yeah, Belle Gunnis, but like at least Belle Gunnis killed a few of her kids.
See?
But she wasn't killing like all of her kids all the time.
Well, she still killed her kids.
My God.
Psychos.
I have a few pictures. This first one, an old portrait of Mary Ann Cotton from an article in the Day's Doings, a late 19th century New York City publication printed November 16th, 1872. Yeah, I mean, her story did make like international news. It was just such a wild story of, I mean, obviously so rare for any era. For a woman to kill a lot of people, women serial killers are much more rare, than men. And B, to kill so many of her own family members.
She's a fucking nut. And she looks crazy.
Yeah, she looks, I mean, even in this old portrait, when you can't like get a real good look at her eyes, you can see, her eyes look real dark.
She looks evil.
She does. And I always wonder, like, when you see these pictures, if we hadn't have heard that story and just saw this photo, what would
I would
think?
still think like, oh,
yeah, I think I would.
that lady.
Yeah, I think I'd be like, ugh. Kind of like, not that we need to go into her story, but we met that lady on the plane yesterday, and we were like, ooh, bad energy. I mean, she was acting shitty, but
she's
her
a big, nasty. See you next Tuesday.
But her vibe was just like, ooh, something dark going on with you.
Yeah, I know. And when I see those people and I pick up on that energy, and my initial reaction is like, ugh, and then in this person's particular instance that we're referencing from our airplane ride, I just thought like, man, who hurt you?
Yeah, how'd you become this?
Yeah, like what trauma have you not dealt with that you are now reflecting back onto everyone around you, you piece of shit?
Or are you the rare person, and I've gone over some of these people on Time Suck, where it's like loving family, doted on, nothing bad seems to happen from what anyone can tell, and this, like, starting when they were young, just something was wrong. Just like how some people are, you're born with lesser eyesight than others. Some people are born with like a lesser amount of just like empathy, just like a conscience. Scary. This next one, Mary's house on Front Street in West Auckland, her final residence and where she killed her last victim, her poor stepson.
Oh.
And then this next one, this is the teapot she very likely used to brew arsenic-laced tea to poison numerous victims. Donated to the Beamish Museum in 1972.
Okay.
And I think that's all the pictures I have of relating to this story.
Well then.
Yeah. Wasn't a lot of photos being taken back then.
You should be careful.
Yeah? You're going to poison me with arsenic?
I mean, it just sounds like I think you're able to do it really slowly over time.
Uh-huh.
Just a little bit here.
Yep.
A little bit there.
I think I talked about this
A
before.
little in your protein shake.
I've talked about this before, but not for a long time, at least on this show. But there was a lady that we found out, that lady in Riggins, where I grew up,
Oh, yeah.
that we found out killed her kids many years earlier.
Mhm.
And then before they rearrested her, like the last two old guys she dated,
Mhm.
one of which was I think it would have been my great-great-uncle, my great-grandpa's brother. But anyway, older guys in their 70s, I think, when they started to date this lady, but totally healthy. Everything's going great. They started dating her and they're dead. And Sig's, who's my great-great-uncle, Sig's son Bobby has been convinced ever since that lady poisoned her dad.
Probably.
Uh-huh.
Just based on what we know.
And and I didn't know her story when I was a kid, and she was creepy. Just like
See?
her eyes were dead. Like there was something terrible in her eyes.
So crazy. I wonder why that is, that like we can read crazy through eyeballs.
I think it's evolution. I think it's like perceiving threats. Sometimes your instincts aren't, accurate.
Yeah.
But a lot of times when a lot of people consistently get the same kind of vibe of somebody, I think it's because we're reading something about a predatory kind of way they're looking at us that would keep us alive previously. Like when somebody stared at us in a certain way. I mean, we are which is why kind of the masks messed people up psychologically during the COVID stuff, is because we are so programmed without even consciously thinking of it to read people's faces and try and detect, are they friend or foe? Which is why con artists often have this schmarmy kind of affect that sadly dupes a lot of people, because it's a put on. Like they are making sure that their face reads as I'm happy, I'm trustworthy, everything down to my haircut and the shirt I wear and the way I'm looking, the way I shake your hand is trying to signal I'm not a bad guy. And because they're able to kind of put that mask on so effectively.
Even you just doing that right now, and I know, love, and trust you, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, it's creepy.
Yeah.
You ready to move on from a murderous mother and talk about a case of an alleged demonic summoning gone wrong down in Mexico City?
Yeah, I'm stoked for this.
Okay, born on October 19th, 1962 in Mexico City, Juan Ramon Saenz was the host of a popular radio show called La Mano Peluda, Spanish for the hairy hand. That primarily revolved around call-ins where listeners share alleged supernatural encounters before the show ended in 2018, according to the BBC. Sounds similar to Coast to Coast AM here in the U.S. And to explain the name, because it's an odd little name, the show was named after the legend of La Mano Peluda, an old legend that can be heard in almost every Latin American country, but seems bigger in Mexico and Colombia and dates back to the Spanish Inquisition. Most versions of the legend say that La Mano Peluda belongs to a man that lived and died during the Spanish Inquisition. He was wrongfully accused of robbery, and as punishment, his hand was cut off. When this happened, he swore he would get revenge on everyone who had anything to do with him being accused and maimed, but then he was murdered before he could do so. At least he couldn't get his revenge now in life, but then his hand seemed to come back after he died, crawling out from his grave, even though I don't know if they buried him with his hand, and seeking his vengeance. The graveyard keeper would see according to this legend, black hairy hand from time to time crawling out of the man's tomb, looking for victims to grab hold of, to tear out their eyeballs, choke them to death. When it was done killing, it would return to the tomb, and after killing everyone who had anything to do with the man being falsely accused, maimed, and murdered, the hand kept killing. And it became a grim fairy tale type story to get kids to, behave. To this day, there are those who claim that the hand has pulled them out of their bed while sleeping, or people who have seen the hand moving through the field, searching for more victims. For generations, parents would tell their children to stay in their beds once it was time for them to go to sleep. Because if they didn't, if they got up before the morning light, the hand, right, the hairy hand, the La Mano Peluda, would come out from their bed, grab them, pull them under their bed, and take them down into hell.
I love this.
So that's how the show got its name. First airing in August of 1995 and broadcast out of Mexico City from 10 o'clock to midnight every weeknight. The show became a cult classic amongst taxi drivers, long-haul truck drivers, just late-night workers in general, and night owls. Over the years, listeners shared various encounters with ghosts, demonic possession, cursed objects, cryptids, extraterrestrials, and more. Juan took over hosting the show in 1999. And he endeared himself to fans of the show by always showing callers respect instead of skepticism. He seemed very open to even just the most bizarre tales. He frequently offered advice to those who were going through difficult situations with a seemingly paranormal origin, and sometimes also would do follow-up investigations with the people he spoke to. And a lot of people now wonder, did one of these follow-up investigations end up getting Juan killed? Time now for the tale of Careful Who You Help. In 2002, Juan answered a call from an extremely disturbed caller named Josue Velasquez. Josue explained that his family had been in debt for years. He was always looking for ways to make extra money, and that is what led him into the occult. He said he had tried summoning several different spirits, some would say demons, who he'd heard could make him fabulously wealthy. He told Juan and his listeners that nothing came from his initial attempts, but he didn't give up. He kept trying new rituals. Then eventually, he came into possession of an old book on witchcraft, complete with yet another summoning ritual for a powerful demon who could give him his fortune, in exchange for sacrifices. Josue told Juan that he tried to summon this demon off and on for over a year. Said he was about to give up, but he was desperate. And one night around 2 a.m, he finally fully committed to the ritual, making deeper slashes into his wrists instead of cursory scratches. And his blood really flowed so much he was worried that he might bleed to death. But instead of dying, his show of faith gave the demon what it wanted, and the ritual worked. Josue claimed that a tall, dark, shadowy entity appeared before him and spoke in a deep and powerful, terrifying voice, saying, "You have summoned me. Now tell me why I'm here." Josue made his first wish. It would be the first of many, with the demon needing to be summoned, but without the requirement of as much of his blood. Each time he made a new wish, and every time the demon demanded a new sacrifice. Josue said the sacrifices started off small just like the initial amount of help he was asking for, but soon Josue became greedy, asking for more and more and more, and the more money he asked for, the greater the sacrifice the demon demanded. Eventually, perhaps inevitably, Josue said the demon wanted a human sacrifice. And not only that, it demanded that the sacrifice be someone from his family. At this point, Josue shockingly admitted on air that he had killed his own grandmother.
Oh my God!
He described how he drugged her so she would fall into a deep sleep. He said he then prayed to the demon for the strength to murder her before he killed her, and that he then, quote, did what he had to do. Afterwards, when she was found dead, he said he was shocked that she didn't have any marks on her and that her body was found intact. It was surprising, he said, because he claimed that he had, quote, did a lot of things to her. Josue told Juan that for this sacrifice he was rewarded with a large sum of money. But there was a catch. He said that once he had the money he had asked for, he now had to spend it all in the same day, and he couldn't give any away or donate it. And if he didn't spend all of his money in one day, the demon would send numerous lesser demonic entities to torment him. Josue now claimed that he still had some money left over by the time the night was almost over, that he got the money, and that he saw a construction worker. He said he suddenly felt compelled to give the man his leftover cash, perhaps to alleviate some of his guilt that he carried for doing what he had done to get the money, and he gave the man the money despite the warning of what would happen to him if he broke the rules. He doubted in that moment, for whatever reason, that the demon would actually know what he had done. But then, by the time he arrived home, he said a demonic entity was already waiting for him. He described the being as looking like a very thin woman with white hair and said, quote, I don't want to turn back because it has a very, very large mouth and a rather large tongue. Josue told Juan Ramon that this disturbing creature had been following him ever since that night and that she was standing behind him right now as he spoke. At one point during the call-in, Josue said that this womanish-looking entity had recently appeared in front of him, holding something in her hand that terrified him, an inverted cross with an eye in the center. Josue now became emotional on the call, had trouble speaking, saying that this symbol was a symbol of death, and it meant he would soon die. Josue also said that his appearance had been changing since he had first successfully summoned the demon, that he was worried that he was becoming some sort of monster himself. He said his nose had grown and his face was transforming. He claimed to have photographed himself before and after the summoning and said he now looked like a totally different person. He claimed that people he encountered recently in the street looked at him with disgust or refused to look him directly in the eye. Josue said he was horrified by what he had done to his grandmother and that he wanted out of his deal with the devil. He said he wished he had never made the deal, that he could take it all back. And despite how tall this tale may seem, the host of La Mano Peluda, Juan Ramon, acted as if he completely believed it all. Juan had Josue stay on the line with him while he called a pastor friend of his named Roberto Guazo, put him on the air as well, and asked him to help Josue. And now here's where this story gets weirder. Juan would later claim that at this point during the call, his studio began to feel exceptionally cold, and that when he and the pastor read some passages from their Bibles on air, the page he was reading from curled up on its own as if something wanted him to stop reading from it. He also claimed that a laptop in the studio burst into flames. Despite these alleged terrifying occurrences, Juan would continue to speak with Josue after that first call-in, and things would get even stranger and more terrifying. In a follow-up call with Juan Ramon and Pastor Guazo, Josue said that he was now being physically and psychologically tormented by 4 separate demonic entities. And then while the pastor prayed for Josue's torment to end, the show's listeners heard disembodied voices and a sinister laugh in the background. Josue sounded utterly petrified. Josue would later claim that after this particular call ended, the demonic entity disguised as a woman stabbed him with a crucifix. Whether or not that claim is true, he apparently did end up in the hospital with a stab wound, and Juan Ramon would visit him there. Juan would keep visiting him and keep getting further and further intertwined with whatever was happening to him for years. At some point, Josue told Juan Ramon again he was heading to a monastery in California at the suggestion of Pastor Guazo, who was still trying to rid himself of the demons he claimed still plagued him. And this trip to the monastery seemed to have worked out. Josue ended up going back to school, became a bacteriologist. He was finally demon-free. Then in 2010, Juan Ramon stopped hosting La Mano Peluda. The following year, Josue called him, told him the demons had returned. At this time, Juan Ramon was now helping produce a segment for a paranormal TV show in Mexico called Extra Normal. He asked the producers if they would interview Josue for the show, and they agreed. And now this story takes its darkest turn. A cameraman, unnamed, reporter Mario Estrada, and Juan Ramon all met Josue for the interview in 2011. Strangely, he told them that he would have to do the interview over a body of water, that he would only be safe to talk about what was happening to him if he was surrounded by water. Now, for some reason, the demon's hold over him would be weakened. So they met on Lake Texcoco. Once there, at the edge of the lake, to get on a boat, they float out towards the center. The cameraman sat behind Josue and Juan Ramon. Mario, the reporter, sat in front of him. Mario and the cameraman thought something was off with Josue, really, really off. He seemed insane, possibly dangerous. He was wearing a black suit with an animal skin wrapped around his shoulders. He had a black leather glove on his right hand. He was using a bone as some sort of staff. Josue explained that the bone was a human femur and that he carried it because it had a protection spell attached to it. Mario then also found it odd how when shaking everyone's hands, Josue used his left hand to greet him and the cameraman, but then he shook Juan Ramon's hand with his right gloved hand. At the end of the interview, Josue promised never to use dark magic again, and he planned to visit a new priest very soon who had recently promised to help him. And that was the last time Josue would speak with Juan Ramon, but it wasn't perhaps the end of Juan Ramon's involvement with Josue's story. Just a few days later, Juan Ramon died May 29, 2011, at the age of 48. His official cause of death was listed as periodontitis, caused by bacteria, both the onset and his demise very sudden, unexpected. It seemed like he was perfectly fine just days before he died, right before he had went on the water with Josue Velasquez. The reporter, Mario Estrada, got into a car accident just after the interview that left him hospitalized for over a week. The cameraman had to have surgery right after this interview due to some unspecified life-threatening medical issue. And the other man who had tried for years to help Josue, Pastor Roberto Guazo, died of a heart attack a week after Juan Ramon died. All coincidence? Or something both paranormal and nefarious? A number of people online have speculated that Josue tricked the man who tried to help him, that in order to save his own life, Josue had made another deal with the demon he had summoned, one where he exchanged his life for Juan Ramon and Pastor Roberto Guazo's, and that he had taken Juan Ramon out on the water as part of a ritual. As crazy as Josue Velasquez's story seems to be, could some or all of it actually be true? Could trying to help someone remove a demonic presence from their life get you killed?
I mean, sure. I think, absolutely.
Yeah, messing around with dark forces.
Yeah. I mean, I am certain that in all of these years and all of these stories, we've had demonic possession stories where then the priest dies, during after an exorcism, or that there's a strange series of events where people who are around or involved in a exorcism then fall ill and then die of said illness. And so it doesn't feel like it's technically directly related to that, but probably is.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to entertain the possibility of demonic possession being real and obviously then demons being real, then it makes sense that these demons could, not just hurt the person they're currently possessing, but anybody who tries to help that person.
Yeah. That's a crazy story.
Yeah, right? A few pictures. This first one, just La Mano Peluda host, Juan Ramon Saiz. Yeah, he was kind of a legendary figure down there. Still has, a lot of fans who just love that show. Yeah, again, it reminds me very much of like Coast to Coast AM.
Yeah. Sounds like a really cool show.
Mm-hmm. And then this is an illustration of La Mano Peluda, created by Mackenzie Nees, found on artbooksfilmmusicmagazine.com.
Cool.
There's a bunch of similar. I was not familiar with that folklore story before. And then finally, a photo of Josue Velasquez.
He just looks so normal.
Yeah, he's still around. He pops up on paranormal podcasts down in Mexico. I don't believe. I'm pretty sure he only speaks Spanish. So if you can speak Spanish, you can find him on a number of Spanish-speaking podcasts as a guest and just like YouTube videos and stuff.
I'm surprised that anyone would want to have contact with him.
I know.
I'd be pretty nervous. I must say. And also, I just don't know that I would trust him. Like if I know.
Yeah.
If I believe that he may have done something to cause other people to lose their lives, then there's no way I'm interacting with that guy.
Yeah, if you're somebody who's like, nervous about that kind of stuff, he definitely seems like a risky guest.
Yeah. like he's not coming on this show fucking ever. He is officially uninvited.
If we ever have guests, or so I guess, we've kind of had like one, I think, once. But if we ever, not that we're going to.
No, not that we're going to. We know. We heard all about how you don't like it.
and we don't, we like doing it the way we're doing it. But if we did ever want to have guests, he would not be. He would not be on the list of top gets.
He would be like on the Z list.
Yeah.
Like all the way at the very end. No, thank you. Desperate for, other guests before I would want him.
Yep.
Ugh, no, thank you. All right, Daniel.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I am ready. Are you ready to tell us some stories?
Yeah. What kind of Layla do you have this week for us?
I have my traditional one. So I guess brown.
Yeah. Neutral. Neutral Layla. Does she smell? She does. She still.
They retain some of these.
Only
Laylas,
the brown. I feel like
they
really
retain their
smells.
smell a surprisingly long amount of time.
All right. Well, let's get into it, Dan.
Okay.
Hello, Queen of the Spoops and King of the Suck.
Hello.
When I was 15, my parents, after years of renting one apartment after another, were finally able to purchase a home of their own. It came with a very silly golden retriever, 3 beds, and 1.5 baths. It was basically an old cabin built in the 1920s that was retrofitted to be a single family home.
Cool.
The main portion of the house consisted of an entryway leading to the living room and dining area, which was next to the kitchen, then a door to the primary bedroom. After the kitchen, there was a very narrow hallway where the addition began, adding on the second and third bedrooms plus the half bath. When you sat on the couch in the living room, you were facing the dining area, kitchen, and that oh-so-narrow hallway. My parents obviously had the primary bedroom. My room was the furthest away at the end of the narrow hallway. Just outside of my bedroom door was the back door of the house, which was my preferred way of coming and going. Next to my room was what we called the middle room. It was a makeshift office/guest room, though we never really had any overnight guests. It was a smaller room with a pull-out couch and a little entertainment stand for the television. It was also where I browsed the internet in the early days. During the day, I never had an issue with the middle room, even though, for whatever reason, it was the darkest room in the house. Always. The house was a bit drafty. If the door to the middle room wasn't closed all the way, it would hit the frame anytime the AC came on or when someone was coming or going out of any other door in the house. I was forever closing the door every day to avoid hearing it slam into the frame, a sound which felt like it reverberated through my room more than anywhere else in the house. Before I would go to bed, I would pull the door to the middle room closed shut, making sure I heard the clicking sound that indicated that yes, the door is fully closed now, only then to wake up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom and find the door wide open. Not ajar, but wide open, more than it ever was during the day. Wide open, and the room was pitch black. I would quickly reach in, grab the doorknob, close the door in one swift movement, and listen for the clicking confirmation that the door was in fact once again closed, and then I would rush away from the middle room as fast as possible. One night, in my early 20s, I'd just come back from the bar around 2:30. I opened the back door as quietly as I could, slipped into my room, dropped off my stuff, and made my way to talk to my dad, who was very obviously awake when I quote-unquote snuck into my house as a full-grown adult. As I walked to the living room, I noticed the door to the middle room was slightly ajar. Paying no mind to the door being cracked open, I greeted my father. With a weird look in his eyes, he asked me, "Hey boy, do you have a guest over?" Being a 22-year-old living at home, it wasn't unheard of that I'd sneak girls in through the back door. "Nah, Pops," I said. He looked at me, confused. "You know, you can tell me if you have a girl over," he said. Me, very confused now, said, "Oh, I know, Pops. I just don't have anyone with me." And without hesitation, he said, "Well, when you went into your bedroom, I saw a skinny girl with brown hair go from your room to the bathroom. That's the only reason I even asked." Noticing the absolute fear that just washed over me, he said, "It might have just been my imagination. Just, make sure if you have a friend over, she's gone before your mom wakes up." Not really knowing what to do or say, I just said, "Okay, well, good night, Pops." And I walked back to my room. As I made my way, I noticed that now, instead of being slightly cracked open like it was before, the door to the middle room was wide the fuck open. A wave of both fear and cold air hit me all at once. Not just a kind of like, ooh, this is a spooky feeling, more like a, I'm about to piss myself kind of fear. I reached into the middle room, grabbed the doorknob like I always did, trying not to look inside the room. I thought I felt or heard someone breathing in the room, a soft, cold kind of breath. Of course, I looked into the damn room. In front of me was the silhouette of a petite girl with long brown hair staring directly into my soul. This normally pitch-black room was now very dimly lit. I could just barely make out the shape of her in front of me. I locked eyes with this thing, and although I could not fully see her, I felt its strange smile slowly plaster across her face. Frozen in terror, I tried to close the door. I don't know if it was my fear or the being in the room preventing me from slamming the door in its face, but the door would not close. After a short time, I finally looked away and was simultaneously able to close the door. The door, however, would not make its very noticeable click sound to assure me that the door was securely shut. Taking my hand off the handle, the door flew all the way open, practically slamming against the wall. Again, I grabbed that damn handle, without looking this time, and slammed the door shut as hard as I could, finally hearing the signature click. Shaking and sweating, I turned to the living room, hoping that my dad had gotten at least a brief glance of what had just happened. But of course, he was fast asleep on the couch. I ran back to my room, closed the door, and barricaded myself inside, refusing to leave until the following morning. That next morning, my dad had no recollection of me coming home, asking me about the small brown-haired girl I had over. He hadn't heard the door slamming or me cursing, absolutely nothing. After that, I made sure the door to the middle room was locked. Not just shut, but locked. Thanks for all the spoops. Your friendly neighborhood bad wolf, Kyle.
Oh, thanks, Kyle.
So creepy.
That is so creepy.
I was just trying to imagine this from our perspective. You know, Kyler is about to come home for the holidays and he's not quite 22, but he's about to be 19 and he's been, living on his own and we're pretty relaxed. I mean, he hasn't asked about he has not yet broached the subject of hey, would it be okay if I had a girl spend the night?
Right.
To which at this age, I think we would still say no. But I'm just thinking well, I don't know. Maybe we would say yes. I mean, it is different.
Yeah, he's an adult.
Yeah, kind of. He's still a little guy in my mind. But okay, he comes home. We see him come in the front door.
Yeah.
We chat with him. Hey, buddy, got a friend with you tonight? He's looking at us like we're crazy. No? And then all that goes down. And then the next morning, we don't remember talking to him about it. I think that was the part that did me in the most.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a crazy detail in that story of his dad being the first one to see this entity and bring it up to Kyle. But then his dad was apparently lucid, I don't know, just not fully awake or so. It's just so weird, like sleepwalking or talking in his sleep.
Oh, I didn't think that. Okay.
But in a weird way, we're clearly brought on by this entity or something that Kyle then did see while he's awake. And he saw this entity before he fell asleep, so it's not like sleep paralysis on his side. Yeah, that's a creepy one.
Yeah, I know. I was trying to think if this entity had the ability to, I don't know, pause time or have a little bit of mind control or trick Kyle's dad.
Yeah.
Because for his dad the next day to just say he didn't remember any of that was particularly odd.
Yeah. Yeah, very, very. That was a good story.
Yeah.
And I know, we've been talking to Kyle for a little while. I will be on Kyle's podcast.
Sometime next year.
Yeah,
We haven't sorted out the details because he's going on tour and we were going back and forth with him. So when that happens, we can report back.
Yeah, his little reference to being like a wolf.
A bad wolf.
A bad wolf is because Kyle's the bass player for Bad Wolves, and you should check him out. See him when they come to your city.
Yeah, I think they're doing a maybe Midwest tour. I can't remember now where he told us where he was headed. Mm-hmm. But you can follow them on Instagram, and he's just a sweet guy.
Yeah, and a hell of a bass player.
Hell of a bass player. Okay. Are we ready for one more tale?
We are.
Okay, this one is, just as a reminder, it is a little rough in some ways, just giving a little bit of a warning. Maybe check this one out first before letting other younger listeners listen. The ending, however, is incredibly sweet.
Aw.
Hey, Dan and Lynze.
Hello.
I would like to remain anonymous since telling this story is going to require a lot of very personal details. Some backstory about my parents is necessary. My mother would scare the shit out of Lucifina. To not sugarcoat anything, she's a horrible, abusive, manipulative person with no redeeming qualities.
Yeah.
My father was so completely opposite from her in every way that I still find my conception hard to believe. He was a very kind, gentle soul who died far too young. He took his own life when I was 7 years old. From what I was told by relatives later, he'd written a suicide note in his truck. He was a long-haul semi-driver and overdosed on drugs. He appeared to have had a change of heart based on how he was found. He had apparently opened the truck door and made it a short distance before he either passed away or lost consciousness. Everyone who knew him believes that this was him realizing what he had done and was trying to get help. Is this detail relevant? I'm not really sure, but maybe. I consider myself a skeptic in the sense that I don't believe 99% of the paranormal stories I hear. With that being said, I have a very hard time rationalizing the experiences I'm about to describe. Not even a week after his funeral, my mother was beating the shit out of me again in our kitchen for coming out of my room without permission. All of a sudden, there was an extremely loud crash. A few pans came crashing out of the cupboard. A few things to note here. 1. All of the cupboards had definitely been shut all of the way. 2. All of the fallen pans were still stacked inside of each other. And 3. They had somehow landed halfway across the room. My mother was so taken aback, she let me go, and I was able to run into my room. I never could make any sense of this incident, but I was grateful and didn't think about it too much after that time. Similar incidents kept occurring, always when I was in a bad situation. For the sake of keeping this story a reasonable length, I'm going to fast forward about 5 years. I was in middle school and struggling with anorexia. I had been over at a friend's house and had eaten a cupcake my friend's mom had made to avoid being rude. They were such a nice family, and I've always had a hardcore people-pleaser problem. I become terrified of how many calories I must have just eaten from the cupcake, feeling like I instantly gained 10 pounds. Panicking, I told my friend my mom wanted me back home. As soon as I made it through the front door, I ran to the bathroom, hoping I'd be able to force myself to throw up. My mother was almost never home anymore, and there was no one to stop me. I was unable to force any food to come back up and began sobbing, leaning over the toilet bowl. I'm not sure how long I stayed like this, but after some time, I felt a hand gently rubbing my back. I screamed at the top of my lungs, knowing I was home alone. I frantically searched the whole house, confirming no one else was there. I didn't know what to do. I was absolutely sure that someone had been rubbing my back, but kept telling myself I must have imagined it. By the end of the night, I had almost convinced myself. Fast forward another 5 or so years. I was a recent high school graduate and had moved in with my boyfriend of 3 years. Let's call him Ben. Ben had been diagnosed with bipolar in our junior year, and his mom had put him on medications to manage the condition. Sadly, now that he was no longer under her roof, he had stopped taking his medications and slid into a very dark mental place. He changed into a totally different person, becoming more aggressive every day. He had never been physically violent, but I could feel us getting closer to that line. I should have left, but my finances were going to make that very challenging. Eventually, my fears were realized, and he punched me in the face, grabbing me by my hair when I tried to leave through the back door. The back door was in a tiny enclosed porch area. To the left of the back door, there was a stairway leading to the unfinished basement. I still don't know exactly what happened next, though. All I know is that Ben had suddenly let go of me and fallen halfway down the basement stairs. I was worried that he could be seriously injured and started to race towards him. I stopped dead in my tracks when I felt a hand firmly grab my shoulder. This freaked me the fuck out, taking me right back to that day with the damn cupcake. I turned around and I ran out the door. Not knowing where to go or what to do, I walked to the long-term care facility where I worked as a CNA. I had been asked to pick up a shift that day, and I knew they were short-staffed by several aides. I wasn't in scrubs, but no one cared. Honestly, the place should have been shut down by the state. Anyways, the scheduler gleefully told me to report to Unit 5, the memory care unit. This was the evening shift, which ended at 10 p.m. But to buy myself some more time to think, I said I'd work a double shift, keeping me overnight until 6 in the morning. Night shift was mostly rounding on the residents every 2 hours, occasionally redirecting those with sundowners, and getting a few people dressed in the morning. Thankfully, this gave me enough time to get in touch with a friend who would pick me up in the morning and let me stay with her. I was still incredibly upset and stressed and enjoyed checking in on this adorable little grandma. She really took my mind off everything, prattling on about her son and his dogs. During my 2 a.m. check, she was still wide awake and smiled a welcoming smile, asking me if I could stay a while. There was enough downtime that I was in no rush. We were talking about a golden retriever when all of a sudden she said, "Oh, you brought your dad again." This caught me by surprise. She did have dementia, but she was by far the most lucid resident on the unit. It was definitely not like her to say such things. "My dad?" I questioned. "Yeah, the good old Indian cowboy," she laughed. I felt like I was going to faint. My dad was Native American and had had a fondness for cowboy hats. She kept chatting, saying, "Oh, he's such a nice man. The other night, he was saying he'd sneak me a brownie from the kitchen." A couple side notes here. This resident was diabetic and forever trying to get extra desserts from people. More importantly, my father loved to cook. I have vivid memories of him in an apron making elaborate meals. My mother would berate him with homophobic slurs, saying that only women wear aprons, but she would always gladly eat his food. Particularly his favorite, frequently made dessert, brownies. This was just too much for me after the insane day I had had, and I told her I had to go check on her neighbor. I ended up living with my friend for a year, finished nursing school, and I met my husband. My life has never been better. We have 2 wonderful kids, a beautiful home, and I love my work. I haven't felt any hands pat my back since, nor have I experienced anything else unexplainable. As a skeptical person, I look back on my experiences and I'm conflicted. It's possible that, as a young girl, I just missed my overprotective father and somehow imagined him being with me in some way. However, this doesn't explain the very first event with the pans, nor many other strange happenings. A part of me wonders if it is possible that my father remained with me knowing the kind of childhood I would be subjected to. Maybe now that I'm in a much better place in life, he knows that I don't need his protection anymore. Sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if dead always means gone.
Oof. That's a great story.
It's a great story. I'm crying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so hard and yet so beautiful. And, this person asked to remain anonymous, but anonymous sender, I hope you're still listening to the show.
Yeah.
And I just want to tell you how proud of you I am.
Yeah. Yeah. What a cool, that's such a crazy, out of a movie, a great scene.
Yeah.
That starts off as a horrible scene where Ben is, off his meds and spiraling with his bipolar and maybe some other stuff going on. In addition to that, just some character flaws or something perhaps as well, where he's becoming abusive. And then the moment he becomes physically abusive and he hits her right after that, he gets basically thrown down the stairs.
I know. As a protective parent, I really love that.
Me too. And then that extra detail of her then going to try to help the person that she cares about, even though it's the person who just attacked her.
Of course. I mean, that is how it goes.
Mm-hmm. But then feeling a hand stop her. That was the coolest detail of the whole story to me.
Yeah. She's
going down there and this entity, which just say her dad, is no.
Yeah.
He's not for you to help.
Yeah. And I love that because as parents, as people who, have children and love and would protect them from anything in any way, shape, or form. I mean, it's really hard to watch your kids go through heartbreak. And if her dad was alive and she was telling her dad what was going on, I imagine that he would also be saying what are you doing? You need to get out of this relationship, So just his ability to reach from the great beyond.
Yeah.
And also just taking it back even further, she's going through an eating disorder and in his own way, her dad is coming to her telling her you don't need to do this.
Right. Rubbing her back.
Right. And then going back even further to when her mom is abusing her and the pots and the pans. And it's I'm sure I'm going to make an assumption here, but her dad was, in a relationship with her mother and probably to some degree knew who she was. I mean, it's not just women who think that they can marry and change men. It goes the other way sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
Too.
The whole knight in shining armor. That kind of syndrome. You're going to help the damsel in distress. You're going to save her.
Yeah, you're going to save her. You're going to fix her. You're going to make it better. And I would go out on a limb here and say that he probably felt very guilty for bringing a child into that situation because he just sounds like he was such a sweet man. And then not only did that, but then left his daughter to deal with her mother all on her own. So it's I don't know. I agree with this sender that every which way he could step in, he did.
I wonder how much her mom had to do with her dad's death.
Oh,
where it's if you're living with that kind of person who's just constantly tearing you down and then you can't take it anymore and then you do something drastic, but then you think about your daughter and you're oh my God, what have I done? And you try, And then she was saying this could be because I just wanted my dad to still be around, but that wouldn't explain the lady with dementia referring to the quote Indian cowboy.
And the brownies, so specific.
So specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story.
Beautiful. Yeah. And as I said before, as we're going into this holiday season, well, I guess we're already in it. By the time you guys hear this, Thanksgiving will have happened.
Yeah.
And we're going into the December holidays and the new year. Yeah, I just really took it as a reminder to be grateful for what you do have.
Yeah.
And to love your people in your life big and love them out loud. And, I think we all think about the people who are not here at the holidays. It's we think about them all the time, but the holidays always bring it up. So just a good little reminder that your people might still be around. And her dad might still be around, but he doesn't need to intervene anymore.
Yeah.
He's probably just sitting up in heaven or wherever he is, watching down and so proud of her.
Yeah, I love that story.
Yeah, me too.
Speaking of thanks,
you want to do some?
Do you want to thank some Annabelles?
Yeah, some spoopy shout outs.
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. I would like to thank the following Annabelles, especially this time of year. I mean, all the year. But,
all the year long, but yeah.
But we feel extra grateful this time of year.
Of course we do.
Thanks for supporting this show. Michael Knight, Kylie Rees, Jack Morlock, Chris Coronado. That's crazy. I knew Chris Coronado in college. Maybe it's the same guy.
Hey, Chris, what's up?
Jeremy Stahl, Demi Gregory, Big Daddy D.
Oh, boy.
Valente Gonzalez and Kylie Skidgel.
Oh gosh,
it's Skidgel. Skidgel,
probably Skidgel, but I'm sure. Is it Kylie?
It's Kylie.
Oh, Kylie, you've heard every skid mark joke
Oh, for sure.
known to man. Oh, you poor thing. Okay.
Oh, sorry, one more. I missed. And Drunken Leprechaun.
Oh, very nice.
Birth name, I'm sure.
Definitely. I would like to thank the following Annabelles for their continued love and support. Mary Winder, Madison Andrews, Imogen Schumacher. I love the
Imogen?
name.
Me too.
Imogen. Or this is with an E, so Imogen.
Oh, yeah, I was picturing I, yeah.
Yeah, Imogen. But still love it. Love it. Imogen's one of my favorite names. Anna Klein, Stephanie Wells, April Zick, Brady Sawyer Hedgecock, Jordan S.
Brady Sawyer Hedgecock.
Uh-huh.
I used to be best friends with a guy named Brady Sawyer Hedgecock.
You did?
Yeah.
Really? At what phase in your life?
Back in college as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, me and Hedgecock. Cummins and Hedgecock, we used to talk about opening a law firm together.
I thought that was Cocks and Butts.
Also, Acock and Butts. Yeah, it was Acock and Butts, also a law firm. No, I've never met them. That person, talk about skids getting teased. Hedgecock got teased.
Hedgecock and Skids should get together. That would be quite the hyphenated last name. Skidgel hyphen Hedgecock.
Yeah.
Jordan S. I think I said that one. Telmaine and Kyle Knight.
Kyle Knight.
And then we really, it was a opportunity for our spoopy shout outs this week to just big shout out to St. Joan for all her work on the Giving Tree this year. It's amazing the amount of problems we have with Amazon every single year. I mean, bless them. They shut us down for fraud every year. At a certain point, they're like, this is a scam. And then we have to get on the phone with them and explain the whole thing again. But she is tenacious. She is on it. And it brings her the most amount of joy to interact with all of you. Thank you for being so kind to her, so patient. She works really hard on it all year long with a lot of behind the scenes stuff that has to be done ahead of time. And yeah, it's just really cool for my mom who, if you guys don't know that already, St. Joan is my mom. She is not a podcast listener. Yeah. She'll listen to Time Suck occasionally. She hates scary stories, so this is not her show. Yeah. But it's a really cool way for her to understand our community.
Yeah.
And she just every year, she's like, oh my God, this person. Oh my God, that person. Did you see this email? Did you see that? Can you believe? Like she just is flabbergasted by you guys. And it's really sweet.
Oh, we love St. Joan.
Yeah, she's pretty great.
And speaking of horror shows, Lynze and I just saw in the theater Heretic.
Dang.
And, not what we expected, but so good.
Not a horror movie.
It's hard to describe what it is without spoiling it. So I would say it is a horror movie, but not a conventional horror movie. And Hugh Grant's performance, I'll be shocked if he's not on some award list. I don't know if the Academy doesn't tend to look at horror movies, but there's many other award shows. He's bound to get some awards for his performance. It was incredible.
It was incredible. And the two lead females, one of them from Yellow Jackets, and then the other gal I didn't recognize. She looks like a young Brooke Shields minus the eyebrows. It was killing me. But also
they did great too.
No, they were excellent. Excellent. I would say, I don't think of it as a horror movie. I think of it as more of thriller.
Yeah.
But if Silence of the Lambs was designated horror, then I would say that this is in that genre.
Yeah.
I thought the writing was brilliant.
The writing is incredible.
It's incredible. I want to look up who wrote it because I have not done that yet. It was so good.
Yeah. So we recommend that this holiday season. And unless you have something else, that's our show.
I think that's our show, Dan.
Well, thanks for continuing to send in your personal tales of terror, everyone, to mystory@scaredtodeathpodcast.com. That last one's going to stick with me for a while. You can email us for everything else at info@scaredtodeathpodcast.com. Not that Kyle's story wasn't also great, because it was. Just not as emotive as that last one.
Kyle, he hated it.
No, I loved it.
He's not, he doesn't want to talk to you anymore.
Thanks to Logan Keith scoring today's shows. Thanks to Heather Rylander for organizing the My Story emails. To book editor Drew Atana, polishing and preparing listener stories for book number 6. Thank you to Olivia Lee, finding both of the stories I shared this week. We are on Facebook and Instagram, where we post pics that accompany episodes and more at Scared to Death Podcast. We also have a private Facebook group, Creeps and Peepers, full of fellow horror lovers. Big thanks to the All Seeing Eyes, the Creeps and Peepers moderators. Thanks for making our online community such a fun and welcoming place for so many. Enjoy your nightmares, Creeps and Peepers. Hope you were scared to death.
Bye.
If spirits threaten me in this place, fight water by water and fire by fire. Banish their souls into nothingness, and remove their powers until the last trace. Let these evil beings flee through time and space. Evil may pass through, but hath no home here within, scared to death.
Mad Magic Productions.
I'm happy. I'm trustworthy. Everything down to my haircut and the shirt I wear and the way I shake your hand. I'm not a bad guy.